No opening joke for this video for once, and that's only because I can't think of one, which is probably only because I'm really excited for Cowboy time. Welcome back to Xeno series staples, the series where I talk about character archetypes that exist throughout all of the Xeno games and explore how they've evolved over time. This time we'll be talking about an archetype that you might not really recognize as being a thing if you started with the Xenoblade games, because it wasn't until Xenoblade 2 that we got a clear example of it in that series. That being said, this is a very good archetype and has a lot of my favorite characters in the series in it. Unlike the last two videos, there isn't one big archetype through line that's started out in Xenogears and then modified throughout the series. It's almost more of a gameplay / aesthetic archetype than a character one, but there is kind of one big character thing that I'm going to talk about at the end. The one thing that is definitely consistent is that every gunslinger uses two pistols as a primary weapon and has a Western motif. As I alluded to before, this archetype is not present in every single game in the series, only making the jump to the Xenoblade titles in 2, and even then only directly showing up in the Torna expansion, so I won't need to spoil the entire series, just Xenogears, Xenosaga, and the aforementioned Xenoblade 2 and Torna. Let me repeat this for those of you in the back. I will need to spoil a lot of Xenoblade 2 in this video. If you're experiencing the game for the first time alongside Chuggaconroy's Let's Play, this will spoil events that won't happen for a very long time as of when I'm recording this, so do not watch this video unless you don't mind that. If you do mind that, I would ask you to not leave the channel as a whole quite yet though, because I am considering doing videos pointing out references Xenoblade 2 makes to previous Xeno games on a chapter-by-chapter basis as the LP progresses. This is so I can expose new fans to the depth of the series without ruining the story of 2 for them, but I'm not sure if there would be an audience for that, so do let me know if you'd be interested. I will be talking briefly about characters in Xenoblades 1 and X, but won't be going into detail about them since I don't really think any of them are actual gunslinger archetypes, so again, don't worry about spoilers for those. And so, we begin at Xenogears with the first gunslinger of them all, Billy Lee Black. He is a young priest belonging to the Ethos faith when he's first encountered. He's a member of their Order of Etones, a type of warrior priest who's tasked with purging the Wells monsters from the world. Every gunslinger in the series is, at least seemingly to me, a different type of cowboy. Billy is not a generic cowboy by any stretch. He's the experienced exorcist priest from stories where man is not the only monster lurking in the Wild West, although he's quite a bit younger than you'd expect that type of character to be, only being 16 years old. Although he's met and lives in the continent of Aquavie, Billy was actually originally born in Solaris, to Mother Raquel and Father Josiah. Note, I didn't say that their name is Black, because their original surname was actually Blanche back when they lived in Solaris. Also, when he was up in the sky, Josiah was a member of the Elements, Sigurd was also a member of the Elements at the same time, so Billy did actually meet Sigurd as a child and recognizes him years later. When Billy was 7, the Blanches fled to the surface, presumably adopting the name Black as a form of disguise then, and at some point they moved to Aquavie, where Billy's sister Primera was born. He was trained in firearms by his father from a young age, and did seem to have a legitimately good childhood until his father vanished one day. 4 years prior to the start of the game, Raquel Black was killed by Wells in front of her children, who struggled very hard to make ends meet. Billy, being the older, was responsible for basically providing for his sister, and he got really desperate before they were eventually taken in by the Ethos, almost going to the point of having to sell his body. The two were taken in by Bishop Isaac Stone, who eventually convinced Billy to join the Cloth, where he became an Etone. With some of this money, Billy decided to build an orphanage in order to protect other children who were orphaned like he and his sister were. Etones seem to have all been issued a specific Etone model gear, but Billy's was customized into Ren Maswo, which looks a bit different and operates using firearms like he does on foot as opposed to magic-y based attacks like the other Etone gears seem to do. Also, somehow, he was allowed to let the children at the orphanage help with deploying it when he called for it remotely on missions. I don't know how that got past any form of regulation, but sure, you could do that, Billy. 2 years after Raquel died, Josiah showed back up, although he seems to prefer using the name Jesse now. With the name change also came a personality change into the standoffish drunk we know him as in the game, which of course caused Billy to grow to resent him. And that was all backstory. In terms of the actual game, he first shows up when Faye is injured, arriving on the Thames to treat him. He joins the party to bring Faye to Ethos HQ where he can be treated better, and then the party returns the favor by helping Billy on one of his jobs to exterminate a ship full of wells. The Ethos HQ is attacked while they're gone, and they return to find the truth. The Ethos was just a way for Solaris to control the populace on the surface and harvest people, while the wells Billy's been hunting for the past few years weren't some sort of reaper or monster, but actually the result of human experimentation. Also, Stone, real name Isaac Stein, sent the wells that killed Billy's mother as part of his master plan to get him into the fold, and then he also kills one of Billy's friends, another E-Tone, right in front of him, so we really do not like this guy after this. Billy then quickly comes to understand why his father's been trying to steer him away from the Ethos this entire time, and all the horrors he's went through, and also, basically, the fight that he'd been doing in secret all these years. His last major action in the game in terms of impact on his character is the fight against Stone, and the fact that he seemingly has to use an attack that kills Jesse in order to finish him off. He mourns his father, although he very quickly shows back up because he just modified the gear to save himself, because Satan is a dumbass and designed a gun gear where its ultimate attack is shooting the pilot as a bullet. Satan, you are a dumbass. I know you're actually a mechanical genius, but you're a dumbass. After this, he mostly just sticks with the party for the rest of the game, although he is one of the characters to get an upgrade to an Omni gear when he aligns with an Anima relic and receives the power-up Elren Mazuo. He does also have a few good lines after the end of the Ethos arc, but for the most part, he's just there to serve a gameplay purpose. He fights with an ensemble of guns, 2 revolvers that are his primary weapons, as well as 2 ether rifles hidden in his sleeves and a large shotgun on his back. These are actually mapped to light, medium, and heavy attacks respectively, and he sometimes combines firing them in sequence for his death blows. He's primarily intended as a support or healer character because that's all his ethers do, but he is actually pretty decent at straight up doing damage, and Xenogears is easy enough where you could, if you like him, just decide to use him as a straight up attacker. He also comes with the gimmick of needing to replenish the ammo for his non-ether guns, and being able to upgrade the strength of both guns and bullets, increasing his attack power in 2 different ways. As mentioned previously, he pilots the gear Ren Mazuo, which is later upgraded to Elren Mazuo. From Xenosaga, we have a space cowboy, literally, Gaignun Kukai Jr. He is a genetically engineered human created as a member of the Udu Retrovirus, or URTV force, by full-time supervillain Dmitry Yuriev, his original name being Rubido. Biologically, he is Yuriev's son, but is only one of a large amount of clones that were engineered to do all sorts of stuff, mainly combat Udu, which is a higher dimensional entity, so yeah, genetic engineering goes places in the future, apparently. Rubido is one of the 4 variant URTVs, which means he was engineered to have powers even beyond that of the standard units. This also gave him a unique individual consciousness as opposed to being part of the sort of hive mind that links the rest of them together. He was originally intended to have the ability to control his cell growth and to regenerate damage, but while he was developing, a conjoined twin formed, with his heart planted right near Rubido's back. This twin eventually developed into Albedo. He got the regeneration powers, while Rubido got the ability to control his cell growth, and the powerful anti-Udu ability called Red Dragon Mode. Rubido is URTV number 666, Albedo is number 667, and the 2 of them grew up close with each other and with URTV 669 Negredo. Rubido was bullied by the standard URTVs, but Albedo frequently stood up to them for him. The boys dove into the mind of Sakura Mizrahi on occasion, because she seemed to be corrupted by Udu and that would be good training for them, and Rubido eventually developed feelings for her and they sort of had a relationship. It was like that kind of thing where it's not quite the same as an internet relationship, but Sakura is unable to communicate at all except through playing the piano in the outside world, so the only way they're able to actually talk together is when Junior dives into her subconscious, at which point he has to be accompanied by 2 of his twin brothers, so I don't know what to call that. It's not quite LDR, but it's not quite a conventional relationship, that's for sure. Sakura knew about the development of Momo at this time, and asked to look after her. During the Milshin conflict, the URTVs fought against Udu, who was in charge of the link procedure, and the Force almost managed to destroy Udu, or at least push it out of this dimension, but due to concern for the other URTVs, he broke the link right before that was about to happen. Every single standard URTV was then driven mad or killed by Udu, and Albedo also lost his sanity. The only members of the URTVs to actually make it off the planet when it was destroyed were the 3 male variants and the 1 female variant, Citrine URTV 668. And a heavily injured Negredo were then picked up by Chaos and Kanan, which we see at the end of the prologue to Xenosaga 2, which I talked about in a video earlier this week. This was actually not an intentional coincidence, believe it or not. I just felt like talking about cowboys, and also felt like making that video. I didn't even make this connection. Cool. The trauma of all that caused Rubito to subconsciously stop his physical aging, being stuck in a 12-year-old's body for the next 14 years. The Kukai Foundation was formed with the help of the Second Milshin government. Negredo became Gaignun Kukai, and since he was able to age normally, is the frontman of the Foundation, and for all intents and purposes is a normal human. This name was actually taken from an old pet cat the variant URTVs took care of, while Kukai was actually the last name of a fictional philanthropist that was used for the government to funnel funds together. So basically, they just said, yep, Gaignun Kukai is the heir to the Kukai name, and he just got control of all these funds and was basically just given the Kukai Foundation on a platter. On the other hand, became Gaignun Kukai Jr., effectively hiding out as his own nephew. During the game itself, we first see Junior as he investigates the disappearance of planet Ariadne, as well as the wreckage of the Woglinde, where he's attacked by Utic. At this point, he infiltrates a battleship of Utic, stealing some info from them. You get to play as him for the first time there, and it's all nice and cool. The Durandal, flagship of the Foundation, later picks up the Elsa and the party after the incident at the Cathedral ship, taking them back to the Foundation. Junior's memories of the Milshin conflict also comprise part of the dungeon area of Cosmos' Encephalon dive, and we get to see him reliving some of that trauma. He pulls out Red Dragon mode against Albedo in the Song of Nephilim, and is almost very destructive with it before being interrupted by the arrival of the Blue Testament. On Proto Merkaba, Albedo gets him to admit that he's guilty for abandoning the rest of the URTVs, before he just kind of pieces out and leaves you with an incredibly disappointing final boss that, again, is just some random Gnosis and not the actual important character who was there just before. I don't like the final boss of Xenosaga 1, in case you can't tell. As for Episode 2, which I would like to stress I only dislike in terms of gameplay and art style and English voice actor change, the actual story is still just as good. Anyway, for Episode 2, Junior is effectively the main character. He's attacked by Utic very soon after the party lands on Second Milsha, and as part of the dive into Momo's subconscious domain, is forced to re-experience more of his past, this time being his childhood at the Uriv Institute and interactions with Sakura. In this domain, he's unfortunately unable to stop Albedo from completely infiltrating Momo's mind and obtaining the Y data, unlocking the way back to Old Milsha. After this, he's contacted by the revived Yuriev, where he's given orders to terminate Albedo, although he disagrees, saying he'll stop him without killing him. Albedo actually joins the party to fight against the Ormus Patriarch, and later on he sneaks out alone to confront Albedo in the space-time anomaly. When he's there, his twin taunts him, and Junior almost completely loses control to his madness before a vision of Sakura calms him down and gives him conviction. Albedo manipulates Junior into killing him, although at this point, the whole engineered weapon part of Junior's mind is taking over, and he does legitimately want the fight as well. He pulls out Red Dragon here, but it seems to be wasn't able to control himself completely before the Sakura thing. Also, the visions of Sakura later on just kind of morph into Chaos, so it might be that Chaos either pulled onto a thread of her consciousness or just straight up created these illusions just in order to motivate him, so that's a little weird. Before passing, Albedo warns Junior about Gaignun's shadow, showing that he knows that Yuriev partially took over Gaignun's body. In Episode 3, Xion is returned to the main character spot, although the URTV plotline is still wrapped up. over the time skip between 2 and 3, he was basically just investigating what's left of Ormus, which is why we don't see him at all during A Missing Year. He's first seen in the game when the Elsa investigates Renlu Chateau, where they're attacked by Margulis. Alongside the Elsa and rest of the party, he is dragged into the memory of Old Miltia, where he doesn't really do too much. He just kinda is there reacting to certain things, understanding more about the past, and experiencing things from a different perspective. Also, some of the enemies that you can encounter during the actual conflict section of Old Miltia are standard URTV units who have been driven mad by Udu, so that's gotta be traumatizing if you put Junior there to fight against them. Although, to be fair, this isn't the first time, because in Momo's subconscious domain in the previous game, you do have to fight against memories of other standard URTVs who were infected by Udu during previous tests before the Miltian conflict. Anyway, Junior eventually learns from Sellers that Yuriev is using Gaignun as a vessel, and that Citrine and Negredo were designed to destroy Rubido as failsafes, and that Yuriev is currently attacking the Durandal. The party arrives back at the ship too late to avert tragedy, everyone in the crew except the Godwin sisters have been killed, and Yuriev is able to activate the Zohar emulators on board, transforming Abel's Ark into its new dungeony state. Also, he is forced to kill Citrine there. Finally, after the entire Abel's Ark dungeon, the party is able to defeat Yuriev, but after Omega is defeated, Albedo shows up in Testament form, teleporting both Abel and the Zohar away. Gaignun manages to wrest control of his body back, and the 3 remaining URTVs try to form the link again, but due to consciousness swapping shenanigans, Albedo and Junior are reunited in the same body, while Negredo finally passes away in his own body, which was occupied by Yuriev and then beaten up a lot, so, you know, all that stuff. Albedo is still there, but due to being tired, he fades into the background of Junior's consciousness, but not before directing him, and by proxy the party, in the direction of Mictum. At the end of the game, Junior stays with the Elsa crew in order to search for Lost Jerusalem. According to one conversation he has with Momo, Albedo is still there, he just hasn't woken up again yet. Also, Junior seems to have developed feelings for Momo, and those feelings do seem to be mutual, so yeah, it is kind of weird that one girl died, so he's basically going for, yep, second chance with her very similar looking sister, but, I mean, they both seem to be happy, so whatever. In terms of fighting, Junior has a lot of psychic-based powers, which all the URTVs have, but unlike the other variants, he chooses to use conventional weaponry most of the time, because, you know, last time he really used his powers, he killed most of his brothers, so that's understandable. He's fond of a lot of old Earth culture and stuff, especially old firearms, and uses guns that would be considered vintage in our time, let alone thousands of years in the future, so honestly, it's a miracle that they actually work. In terms of mechs, he is capable of piloting an Eggs in Episode 1, and gets control of the ES Asher in Episode 2, piloting it alongside Chaos in Episode 3. We are now left with the question, what kind of cowboy is Junior? While none of the gunslingers are actually cowboys or exist in a Western-type setting, because he actually adopts it as an aesthetic as part of his kind of childishness and wanting to play the role of the hero and stuff. So, Junior isn't so much a cowboy as he is whatever the cowboy equivalent of a weeaboo is. Now, that sounds bad, but I actually mean it as a compliment. He is a quality cowboy, even if he is removed a few steps from the actual practice of cowboying, which I don't think is a verb, but whatever. Also, to add on to this, in his Episode 2 design, you can't see it on the model, but you can in concept art, he has a Montana belt buckle. I honestly just think it's impressive that people that far in the future even know Montana was a thing, let alone still have memorabilia for it, but what are you gonna do? Junior works in mysterious ways. Touching quickly on Xenoblade 1, there is no real gunslinger archetype. There are characters that use guns, but pistols and revolvers don't really seem to exist or at least be regularly used in this world at all. Dixon and Charla could sort of be part of the archetype. Charla is primarily a support healer like Billy is, and is the gun user of the party, but again, she doesn't dual wield, so it is kind of ambiguous. Although to be fair, her weapon is the ether rifle, and Billy does carry 2 of those on his person, so yeah, I don't know. If I had to point to one person from that game, I would give it to Charla, if only because she has cowboy-like hats in 2 costume concepts in the Definitive Works art book. One of them is, of course, a skimpy cow-themed swimsuit, and the other one is a fairly typical steampunky western outfit, so I wish we got one or both of these in the actual game to confirm it, but, I mean, as not a cowboy as she is, Charla is the closest to it in the game. In Xenoblade X, we kind of have the opposite problem. Dual guns are just a weapon type that can be used by a lot of people, including the Avatar, but nobody really fits the archetype very well. Elma is the most important dual gun user, or at least required, you could still give them to your cross, but she doesn't really have any Western theming at all. Sliding Slinger's animation is a reference to one of Billy's death blows from Gears though, but that's a thing that every dual gun user can learn. The other party members that use dual guns are Fog and Celica, who fit Cowboy even less than Elma does, so it really is a wash. Personality-wise though, the most cowboy-like character in the game is Yelv, although he doesn't use anything remotely resembling the just normal pistols the other two gunslingers do. And again, he's only really a cowboy because he says pard a lot, which I think is just a thing in the dub, so yeah, there really is nothing here. And finally we arrive at our last yeehaw, Xenoblade 2's Cole/Minoth. He is a flesh-eater blade originating from Indal, at least that was when he was awakened most recently, and is driven by Amalthus. He was turned into a flesh-eater using Indal's recovered Judicium technology, and probably was subject to that against his will, as opposed to voluntarily becoming one like Jin does later. He's extremely disturbed when he eventually discovers his driver's hatred of humanity, and basically avoided all contact with him ever since he saw the destruction wrought by Malos. Adam Origo, Lord of Valletta, Prince of Torna, and all that stuff, visited Indal a lot in the past, and must have met and become acquainted with Minoth then, because they do recognize each other later. It seems like, when Minoth shows up just to make a cool epic save at some point in Torna's story, that he just heard word that the Prince of Torna was heading to Oresco for something and decided to meet up with him. After this, he joins with the rest of the party, trying to stop Malos and win the Aegis War. He becomes Adam's second blade after Mithra, using his flesh-eater powers to grant his full strength to someone other than his designated driver. He also seems to be a bit envious of the bond Laura has with her blades, and says that all blade driver bonds should be more like that than the extremely dysfunctional one he has with Amalthus. Even back then, he was a playwright, although he probably wasn't as accomplished or good as he is later on. After the war, he renamed himself to Cole in order to hide from Indal, eventually winding up in Uriah. He and Vandam fought together as mercenaries for a time, although it's not really explicitly stated that he let Vandam drive him, or if he just used his flesh-eater powers to fight at full power alone, and Vandam was just also there with Rock. Eventually though, his body got the better of him and he had to retire, because he was just completely deteriorating from being an imperfect flesh-eater. He moved to Fanzamaima, became a playwright full-time, and seems to either own or just live at the playhouse there. Some of his plays even seem to be embellished accounts of the history he was there for, most likely having to change things both for the sake of the memory of his friends, and so Indal didn't catch on to the fact that, he was alive for that and obviously isn't a long-lived Indaline. Vandam brings the party to Fanzamaima in order to meet Cole because he might be able to help them reach Elysium. After Mithra's awakening and Vandam's death, he reveals his true nature to the party and gives Rex one of his weapons, sending him to find Amalthus. When he's playable in Torna, Minoth is a unique wielder of the gun knife weapon type. These are blade weapons, and they're just little pistols that transform into daggers and vice versa. He is the first definitely a gunslinger character to use a weapon that isn't a gun, barring Junior's mech weapons, but seeing as how the knives and guns are the exact same thing, and he's wearing a bladified version of a cowboy outfit, I think this is okay. His art names are all in Spanish, even in the Japanese version, and he has a bit darker skin, so he might actually be based on a Mexican cowboy. The first cowboy-like profession in the Americas started in modern-day Mexico, and a lot of cowboys in the US were also Mexican, so this does actually work. The one through line, besides the guns and the cowboy stuff, that I think you might be able to say exists within this archetype is daddy issues. Basically, Billy obviously has them. He only gets over them because he learns that what his father was doing was eventually for a good cause and that he was in the wrong to trust Stone. Junior obviously has massive daddy issues because, your father is a eugenicist trying to take over the government, supervillain trying to destroy God, so yeah, that's kind of a big deal. He gets over those by basically just killing his dad, and also reconciling with Albedo. And then, while Amalthus isn't Minoth's father or father figure, he is the one who awoke him and transformed him into the thing he is, and Minoth clearly wants to distance himself as much from that as possible, so I guess that kind of counts. And that's going to be it for this video. If this is somehow the first one from my channel you've seen, and you liked it, I mean, like the video, comment on the video, but then also subscribe and stick around for more content about the entire Xeno series, because there's a lot to talk about. Also, give your feedback about the idea of me doing a whole "these are references to other Xeno games and Xenoblade 2 chapter by chapter alongside the Chugga Let's Play." I should probably ask him for permission to do something like this, but I'd like to gauge audience thoughts about it first before I even do something like that. But yeah, I like all of these characters. All of them except Junior I do kind of wish got more screen time, but yeah, what are you gonna do? I do, of course, really hope that this whole cowboy thing keeps coming back and is a character archetype that's like actually used as a party member in all future games. Like, yeah, I know if you do that, then you've got like, yep, you got the Katana Man and then you got the Gunslinger. That's 2 slots on a potentially fairly small party that are always going to be taken up by similar characters, but I don't know, maybe alternate between them on a game-by-game basis or something like that. Make the Gunslinger an enemy every now and then. I don't know. I just want to see more yeehaw in my Xeno. That's all I got. Until next time, this is Luxin, signing off.